Egress has published its email security risk report, looking at the inbound and outbound threats that organizations face. I'm joined today by VP of Threat Intelligence, Jack Chapman, to dig into some of the key themes from this report and get his take on them. So, Jack, one of the big stats in the research is that 99% of the cybersecurity leaders that we surveyed said they were stressed about email security. So why is email so stressful? Can you share some thoughts on that?
I must say, Bex, it wasn't a surprise whatsoever for me to see this. Email is one of those technologies that all organizations rely on, or they rely on technology that's built on top of it. And it's so stressful for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, is there's so much of it. There's so much noise that comes with it, either from users reporting potentially dangerous activity, be it compliant concerns about people making mistakes within the email itself. But it's also the fact that it's one of the largest attack vectors into organizations as a whole. And it's quite an interesting area where, despite the fact we use a lot of the same language to describe these attacks, they've evolved significantly over the time. And for a lot of people sort of are managing these systems, it's how can they ensure that what they have in place best supports it? How can they support their users with training and being able to sort of, on an operational basis, cover that stress and load that creates? And it's also a huge admin overhead for them and their teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to dig into some of those themes a little bit later in a couple of questions time. But what I want to do is get your thoughts initially on a couple of those stresses in detail. Now, the top stress was phishing emails that are sent from compromised supply chain accounts. Why is that causing such concern for our surveyed cybersecurity leaders?
This has been a sort of growing threat over the last sort of 12 to 24 months, where we often talk about it under the umbrella of business email compromise, where historically that's been focused on using just a random business account, which passes its authentication in order to send phishing emails on behalf of the attacker. And the reason they did that is because it leads to success for them. However, they've realized that actually, if they target or utilize someone with a pre-existing relationship with an organization, their supply chain, it massively increases their success rate again. So it almost it breaks a lot of the defensive technology. People are expecting it on a human level, so they're a lot more trusting. So their traditional training won't come into play. And both on a technology and human level, it sort of increases the likelihood of success. And as we know, criminals are becoming more sophisticated and more specialized, so they are more likely to perform these attacks because it's the bigger return for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it ties in quite nicely actually with the second attack that we saw as causing the most concern, which was account takeover. So obviously we've talked about attacks coming from the supply chain, but then actually the second highest was those account takeovers taking place in the organizations themselves. So kind of looking at that, it's a little bit kind of cart before the horse, but actually how and why did these account takeover attacks occur?
Absolutely. It's quite just where vast majority of account takeovers do come for phishing. It's sort of 85%, which is a huge proportion. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why these account takeovers are happening from this is the number one target from phishing is credential scraping. It's attempting to get people's logins in order to access their Office 365 or any other service that uses this single sign-on mechanism. And the reason for that is just the wealth of information available and the power you have from that one login. It's quite often the fact that you can access the whole of the company's Active Directory, so you can get all of the intelligence about the business. You can access all of the files stored on that account. But an interesting trend we're seeing, going back to some of the supply chain compromise, is then using that compromised account, that account takeover, to then launch further attacks at others. So it's almost being used as an asset. And it's an interesting sort of change with email, where it's not just being concerned on the inbound, but it's that end-to-end piece of inbound leading to outbound as well. So that's really where this sort of concern, and really it's a threat that is on the rise, is coming from. It shows no signs of sort of slowing down because the criminals are profiting from this mechanism. The last thing to add to that from a ecosystem point of view is criminals will often compromise accounts and then sell them to those sort of targeted parties who are actually actively interested in them. And that's how they're getting their profit, and why we need to be very focused on how we can prevent the mechanisms that lead to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of that cycle of inbound leading to outbound, leading to further inbound to outbound, and sort of breaking that chain. Now, one thing that sort of pops up in my mind is, yes, but what about multi-factor authentication? Surely that can help us here. What's your view, Jack?
Multi-factor authentication can absolutely help, and it's imperative that organizations roll this out as quickly as can if they haven't already, just because the fact it will frustrate the attackers. Mm-hmm. The unfortunate piece in sort of this sort of development of defenses against these attacks is that multi-factor authentication has long been a thorn in the side of these attackers. So much so that they've created technologies to help them bypass this technology as well. Before I dig into more on how they're doing that, I just want to say, just because they can bypass it doesn't mean we shouldn't have it, because it's still frustrating a large proportion of these attacks. But the way they're doing this is actually folding in multi-factor authentication into the attacks now, where previously they may only ask the user for their username and password. They're actually adding another step in their attack process, where they're actually ask the user for their multi-factor authentication, either as part of that credential scraping web page, or they might even send out sort of hundreds of text messages to that user in order to try and convince them to give up that code and wear them down in a way. So once again, a bit like with phishing, where attackers are really understanding the weaknesses in human behavioral science, it's important that we sort of understand how this new chain is changing that game as well, where in a lot of ways it's more of the same. Target the human, target that behavior in order to get success for an attacker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've started talking about it here, but my next question is very much around, it's my last question, it's very much around what can organizations do to help improve their defenses from both that detection of these advanced attacks, but also from that human and that behavioral side of things. What would you say to organizations listening?
I think there's two key elements from that question. One is sort of what can we do on the technical and solution side, mm-hmm. and what can we do on the human side? And most importantly, how can we combine those together? Because attackers viewing it from an end-to-end challenge, we on the defensive side need to as well. On the technical side, because a lot of these attacks are becoming so automated, they are becoming very polymorphic, where every attack is different. They're using burner email accounts where they don't care if they get reported half an hour later. They would have got their return on investment. It's important that we put into place proactive systems with advanced detection that can sort of catch these new generation of phishing attacks. But it's also important that what technology we put in place now will have confidence that it can catch threats in 6 months or a year's time, so that we are looking to that future, because the evolution of some of these attacks is only increasing because they are being so successful. On the other side, especially on sort of the human people side, it's important that any solution we put in place sort of enables and helps them. We've seen a lot of cases through the history of cybersecurity across all verticals and all sort of fields, where if technology frustrates a user too much, they try and find a way around it. And therefore, we think we've mitigated a threat, but we haven't really. And that's always a danger for us as organizations. So we need to work with the users on that to continue the training, but also understand the fact that the attackers are targeting the human behavioral science behind sort of how we think and work as humans. So just saying to a user, you've been trained, good luck, isn't enough. We need to support them with other elements such as nudge theory, real-time teachable moments, really engage with them and bring them on this cyber journey going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I said that was my last question, but I have one other sort of question around in terms of from an administrator point of view, what can this technology and what can this experience look like? Is it more to manage and harder, or can it be something different?
It's a really good point, Bex. And I mean, it's 2023. I'm just going to put that out as the first point, where we need to be making lives easier for our administration teams, where there's less manual configuration. There's less reaction from that team to then go and update, be it YAML rules or other policy-led decisions in order to keep businesses secure. We also need to give them more intelligence and oversight. I mentioned that sort of the top of this conversation, where actually there's a lot of work and noise around email. We need to be stripping that completely back for people and sort of saving administration teams time, money, and in some ways, most importantly, stress, so that we can sleep better at night.
Perfect. Well, on that note, Jack, thank you so much for your time. And for anyone listening who would like to read the full report, please do download your copy via the link that has been shared. Thanks again, Jack.
Thank you very much.